talking about the tribulation, and we got a little bit more talking to do from Daniel this morning. So we'll see how far we get. But for now, turn in your Bibles, please, to Daniel 9. The tribulation is a future 7-year period where God is going to finish his discipline with Israel and finalize his judgment on the unbelieving world. If we were going to define the tribulation, that's what it is. The church is not going to be present. We've already covered this. We're going to be raptured prior to the beginning of the tribulation. But throughout the Bible, the tribulation is associated with the day of the Lord, the time during which God personally intervenes in history to accomplish his plan. It is referred to as the tribulation in the latter days. It is referred to as the Great Tribulation, which refers to the more intense second half of the 7-year period of tribulation. It is a time of distress, we are told. It is referred to as the time of Jacob's trouble. And we have this description of the tribulation that attends the day of the Lord. Zephaniah chapter 1 says, "That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry." There are going to be a variety of divine judgments and celestial disturbances and natural disasters and terrible plagues that encompass the tribulation. And we read all about it in great detail in Revelation 6 through 16. Now, in his mercy, God sets a limit on the duration of the tribulation. That's why it's only 7 years. Jesus himself said in Mark 13, "Those will be days of distress unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. And if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive." So the tribulation is going to be marked by all of this stuff. Daniel chapter 9 reveals the purpose and the time of the tribulation beginning in verse 24, and we have looked at this already. The passage speaks of 70 weeks. 70 weeks that have been declared against your people, Gabriel says to Daniel. Daniel's people are who? Jews, right? The nation of Israel. Verse 24 speaks of a period of time where God's purpose is sixfold. And we will talk about that. God declares that 77s will fulfill all of these things. And the sevens are groups of years. So 77s is 490 years. Some translations refer to 70 weeks of years. Same thing. In verses 25 and verse 26 of chapter 9, we find out that the Messiah will be cut off after 7 sevens and 62 sevens. 7 plus 62 is 69. Yes, get your fingers and toes out. Okay. 69 total sevens. And those periods of 7 begin with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. In other words, 69 sevens, or 483 years after the decree to rebuild is issued, that is when Messiah will die. And historians confirm that 483 years passed from the time the decree came to rebuild Jerusalem to the time that Jesus was crucified. And most Christian scholars, regardless of whatever their view of eschatology is, have the understanding that the sevens equal years, groups of years. I did a deep dive this last week and took about half a day digging into this. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, where did the sevens come from? 7 sevens and 7 sevens and 79 sevens and all this other. Where did we get this from? Well, I went back to good old Kyle and Delitzsch. They are some of the prima Old Testament linguistic scholars, among others. And that word for sevens is literally translated a heptad. A heptad, okay, which is a group of 7. Whereas in our world today, we function by way of tens, don't we? I mean, everything is based on tens. In the Jewish days, they dealt with sevens. 7 days, God made the heavens and the earth, and he rested. What was the other? I had it all figured out what I was going to say. 7 periods of 7 would be 49 years. Seven sevens would be 49 years. And there was the year of Jubilee, right? Every 7 years, you were to have a Sabbath year where the land was to lay fallow. When Israel went into captivity, God redeemed those 77s that Israel had neglected as far as those Sabbath years, and so they were in captivity for all that period of time, except for the fact that the last set of sevens has not taken place, because that is the tribulation. So the 70 weeks, 77s of years, and we're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes and talk about why we're calling weeks years and all that kind of stuff. 70 weeks has been determined, 490 years. With the death of Messiah, we've only gone through 69 of those, 483 years. So that leaves that 1 7-year period that needs to be fulfilled for all of those things to take place. Now, verse 27 of Daniel 9 gives us a few highlights of that final week. Let's look at that, verse 27. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Jesus refers to this passage in his Olivet Discourse that we looked at early on, Matthew 24. The ruler who confirms the covenant and sets up the abomination is the same one that is referred to in Revelation 13 as the beast. Okay? According to Daniel 9:27, the beast is going to have this 7-year covenant. Halfway through, he's going to break the covenant, and he's going to put a stop to the Jewish sacrifices. So again, last time we talked a little bit about the sacrifices, and hopefully next week we'll talk some more about that, because I've been digging into the whole sacrificial thing too. But Revelation 13 explains that the beast is going to place an image of himself in the temple and is going to require the world to worship him. And Revelation 13:5 says this is going to go on for 42 months, which, if you do the math, is 3.5 years. It's the second half of the tribulation. So we see a covenant lasting to the midpoint of the week, the first 3.5 years, and then we see the beast who made the covenant demanding worship for the second half of the week. The total length of time is 84 months or 7 years. There's also a reference over in chapter 7 of Daniel, and we didn't really dig into chapter 7 too much, but chapter 7 and verse 35 is a reference to the last half of the tribulation. The ruler there is going to oppress God's people for time, times, and half a time. See my little half nub there, okay? All right. Chapter 7 and verse 25 of Daniel. So a time is 1 year, times, plural, that's 2 years, and half a time, that's half a year, so 3.5 years. And this time of oppression against the Jews is also described back in Revelation 13, verses 5, 6, and 7. It's part of the Great Tribulation. There are other references that refer to this as well. So we have this tribulation. Daniel has been thinking of God's program in terms of years. And it would be most natural for him to understand these sevens as years. And he gets this from the studying that he's been doing back in Jeremiah 25 and 2 Chronicles 36 that refers to those things. Now, again, we today think in units of 10. Okay, we think of decades. Daniel's people thought of things in sets of 7, heptads. 7 days in a week, every 7th year a Sabbath rest, and so on. I mentioned that earlier. The reason that we say that the 7 sevens and 77s are years is because what you ultimately have to do, and I looked this up. I went into the nitty-gritty. I got into the Hebrew. I dug out all my lexicons and word study stuff, and me and Dr. Weiss had a wonderful time together. But what I found out was, from a word study standpoint, there's no evidence. There's no evidence that it means years. It talks about 7 as being 7. Okay? So where do we get this concept from that the sevens that were being talked about are actually years and not literally weeks or days? Well, the 490 could not be days, because 490 days only equals about 1 1/3 years. That wouldn't be enough time for all of the events prophesied in Daniel 9, 24 to 27 to actually take place. The same thing is true of 490 weeks of 7 days each. That would only equal 3,430 days, or about 9.5 years. So if days were intended, you would expect Daniel to have added of days after the 77s, because that's what he did when he wrote in chapter 10, verses 2 and 3. He wrote literally 3 sevens of days to make the difference that he's talking about 3 literal weeks here. But also, since Israel and Judah had failed to keep the sabbatical years, every 7th year the land was to lie fallow according to the law, Leviticus 25. Throughout her history, they had forgotten to do that. The Lord enforced on the land 70 Sabbaths. So the 490 years would be required to complete 70 sabbatic years, with one of those occurring every 7th year. So that span of time that is decreed for Daniel's people and for the holy city is concerned not so much with world history or church history, but with the history of Israel and with the city of Jerusalem. And by the time the 490 years actually runs its course, God will have then completed those 6 things that he lists in those 3 verses in chapter 9. The first 3 of those things have to do with dealing with sin, and the second have to do with the coming kingdom. And the basis for the first 3 is provided in the finished work of Jesus. But all of those things, all 6 of those things, will be realized by the time of the second coming of Jesus. So there are 6 things that he mentions here. And again, let's look at it. Verse 24. Excuse me. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. Here we go. Number 1, to finish the transgression. Number 2, to put an end to sin. Number 3, to atone for iniquity. Okay? Now, Jesus has accomplished all 3 of those already. So it's half done. Now, number 4, to bring in everlasting righteousness. Number 5, to seal both vision and prophet. And number 6, to anoint the most holy place. Those things. Let's talk about each of these things here for a few moments. Finishing the transgression of Israel. The word finish means to bring something to an end. Israel's sin of disobedience is going to be brought to an end at Jesus' second coming when she repents and when she turns to him as her Messiah and Savior. Then she is going to be restored to the land. She is going to be blessed in answer to Daniel's prayer that he has been praying. Now, in Old Testament days, the highlight of the year in Israel's calendar was the Day of Atonement. We read about it in detail in Leviticus 16. And on the Day of Atonement, the entire nation assembles before God. The nation acknowledges her sin and offers blood sacrifices to cover that sin. And though that sacrifice covered Israel's sin for the next 12 months, it did not permanently remove sin. We read about that if we go over to Hebrews chapter 10, where we learn about Jesus being a superior sacrifice to the Old Testament. See, it was necessary that a sacrifice be offered to God that would permanently remove all the accumulated sins. And that sacrifice was offered by Jesus when he died and made payment for all sins that had not been removed in the past. So Jesus' atoning work on the cross made possible his future finishing of Israel's transgression. The second thing that is mentioned here in the list, God is going to put an end to sin. The verb there has the idea of sealing something up, closing it up. It's sealing something with a view toward punishment. It emphasizes that Israel's sin, which had gone unpunished, would be finally punished in or through Jesus Christ, who is the substitute, who would bear the sins of the world on the cross. Then at the second coming, he will remove Israel's sin. Read about it in Ezekiel 37. Thirdly, he says God is going to atone for wickedness. And that verb to atone means to cover or to expiate or to pay for. And that also relates to the final atonement of Israel when she repents at the second coming, as the provision for that atonement was made at the cross. You see, when Jesus died on the cross, he set it up so that all of these things are going to be taken care of at his second coming. He made it possible for that to be the case. In other words, Jesus paid it forward, if you want to think of it from that standpoint. The blood that was applied to the mercy seat over the Ark of the Covenant enabled God to dwell among his sinful people. And similarly, Daniel's prophecy promises that because Jesus' blood shed on the cross, God would deal with sinners, and in this particular case, specifically with Israel. Number 4, the positive aspects now. Being satisfied with the death of Christ, God is now going to bring in everlasting righteousness. The form of that verb, bring in, means to cause to come in. And everlasting is a word that means ages. In other words, if you were to literally translate it, it would say to bring in the righteousness of the ages. And it is a prophecy that God's going to establish an age that is characterized by righteousness. Now we know that, of course, as the millennium. Number 5, it says that he's going to seal up vision and prophecy. All that God through the prophets said he would do in fulfilling his covenant with Israel are going to be fully realized in the millennial kingdom. And until they are fulfilled, those prophecies are unsealed, if you will. And then lastly, he says he's going to anoint the most holy place. And it is probably a reference to the dedication that will take place of the most holy place in the millennial temple, which Ezekiel 41 through 46 talks about. So all of these things are going to be ultimately accomplished at the second coming of Christ. Once again, just at the risk of sounding redundant, I want to talk again about the historical implications so we can see from a historical narrative where these 70s and 7s and stuff are dividing here in this passage in Daniel. Gabriel said the 77s would begin with the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, this particular decree that Gabriel is referencing is the fourth of 4 different decrees made by Persian rulers in reference to the Jewish people. The first decree was by Cyrus, 538 BC. We read about it in Ezra. We read about it in 2 Chronicles 36. The second was the decree of Darius the first, Darius the Mede, and that was in 486 BC. We read about that in Ezra chapter 6. This is the decree that actually was a confirmation of the first decree, remember? Because Ezra and the people are in the process of, rebuilding the temple, and the bad guys of the lands come along and say, hey, what are you doing? And hey, we're rebuilding the temple. Well, hey, let us help. Well, no, you're not Jewish, you can't help. Get away from us. Well, we're going to tattletale on you. And so they write to the king, O king, live forever. These Jews, these rebellious people are rebuilding. And so the word is brought forth and they stop. And then when Darius gets in, he does some reading and says, well, did we ever do that? And they said, well, yeah, we did that, but then we stopped it. And then he sends a thing saying, you know what, start that up again. And don't let anybody hinder them. Okay, so there's the second one. The third decree was by Artaxerxes. And this is about 424 BC. And we read about it in Ezra chapter 7. The first two decrees had to do with rebuilding the temple. This one is about the finances needed for the temple worship. He's basically sending a note to the governors of the territories saying, whatever these Jews need for the worship of their gods, you provide it. Okay? You give them all the bulls and the rams and all this kind of, whatever they need, because we want them praying to their God for the king. So you provide it. And then the fourth decree is also by Artaxerxes, and on this occasion we get into Nehemiah now, and this is where Artaxerxes grants Nehemiah permission to rebuild the walls of the city. All right? And that's the one that is referred to in Daniel 9 and verse 25. The end goal, of course, is the appearance of the Anointed One, the ruler. That's a reference to Jesus. So just making sure that historically we're kind of clear on all of that. Just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Daniel is told in verse 26 of chapter 9 that a ruler is going to come who will place abominations on a wing of the temple. Now, what is a wing of the temple? It's not necessarily a wing of the temple like this. It's not talking about a wing of the temple like a wing of the building. It's basically talking about the pinnacle, okay? The steeple, the pinnacle. That's the wing, all right? That's how it is. So think of it this way. Think of it from the standpoint of we go out here and we have a steeple on the end of the building out here. If somebody took some kind of a pagan image and whatnot and stuck it on the top of the church steeple. I mean, that basically is what he's referring to. And this is something that is going to happen, and it's going to cause desolation. People are going to be compelled to worship this image, and then his end will come. The end that is decreed is poured out on him when the false prophet and he are going to be cast into the lake of fire when Jesus returns. The Antichrist, as we've said before, is going to break his peace treaty with Israel at the beginning of the second half, the midpoint of the tribulation. Time, times, and half a time. And the fact that this is the same as 3.5 years, which in turn equals 1,260 days or 42 months, means that in Jewish reckoning, every month has 30 days, and every year has 360 days. According to the Jewish calendar, we're not talking about the Gregorian calendar here, talking about the Jewish calendar. So that confirms that the 360-day Jewish year is used in the calculation of all of these things. So since the events of the 69 sevens were fulfilled literally, the 70th seven, yet unfulfilled, when it finally comes, will also need to be fulfilled literally. The first part was, the second, there's no reason why we shouldn't think the second part will be. Now for the outline of these years. It's going to be triggered by this decree permitting the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. It's very interesting that the event that's going to trigger the last 7 years is going to be the covenant that the Antichrist makes to protect the Jews. We find a decree at the beginning of the 490 years, and now we find one here at the end as well. And history tells us that there were 4 different decrees, and I've already mentioned that to you. Again, it took, Gabriel divides these things into a couple of different parts, doesn't he? First of all, he said there are 7 weeks. In other words, 7 sets of 7 years, or 49 years. 7 times 7 is 49. And then there are 62 weeks. We do the math, 434 years. Why is there such a division? Well, it took 49 years to rebuild Jerusalem. And that was done, Gabriel said it was done in troublesome times. And if we take the time and we go back through and we read through Nehemiah, we know that it was not an easy thing. I mean, they were heckled all the time by outsiders. I mean, even people trying to assassinate Nehemiah. So it was a difficult task to restore the city. Then, 434 years later, we come to Messiah, the Prince, who is cut off for the sins of the world. What follows his death? Does Israel accept the message that he brings? No, they don't. They lie about him. They persecute his messengers. They stone Stephen in the book of Acts. They refuse to acknowledge his kingship. So what happens? Rome comes and destroys the city and wrecks the temple, and the nation cut off Jesus Christ. So what happens is he cuts them off from being a nation from that point, AD 70, until May 14th, 1948, when Israel again becomes a recognized nation. Now, Rome is called the people of the prince who shall come. Who's that prince? Well, it's not Messiah, because that refers to Christ. The prince that shall come is Antichrist. And he is going to be the leader of a restored Roman Empire. So the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in AD 70 under Titus, the general, Titus Vespasianus, was but an illustration of a future invasion and future destruction that is going to be led by the Antichrist. Remember, we talked a little bit about studying prophecy. There's this element of what is called dual fulfillment. In order for a prophet to be considered valid, something that the prophet prophesied about has to happen within that prophet's lifetime or shortly thereafter, as opposed, in addition to what might be centuries down the road. So the precursor was the destruction in AD 70. But what really he's getting at is this future invasion led by Antichrist. So Antichrist, this prince who is to come, makes the agreement with the Jews, for 7 years. This is the final 7 years of the 490-year period between the death of Jesus and the signing of the covenant. You have the entire age of the church, where we're at right now. The 490 years are in operation only when Israel is in God's will as his people. When Israel crucified Jesus, she was set aside. The clock was paused. But when Antichrist signs on the line with Israel for this peace treaty, then the last 7 years kicks in. And that is the time of Jacob's, the tribulation. Now, after those 3.5 years, we read in Ezekiel 38 and 39 about Gog and Magog. Gog and her allies will invade the area of Palestine, which includes Israel. And God is going to judge them. Antichrist is going to invade the land. Gog and Magog are not the Antichrist. Somebody totally different. All right, bunch of bad guys from the north. They come down, they invade the area. Antichrist comes up from the south. He invades the land, he breaks his covenant, he sets himself up as world dictator. He is going to stop all worship at the Jewish temple. He's going to force the world to worship him in his image. That is the abomination of desolation that the Bible talks about. How will that period end? It ends with the second coming of Jesus, when he meets all of these rebel armies on the plains of Megiddo. And the battle of Armageddon takes place, and they are defeated. Okay? So that's where we're at with our understanding of all of this. Next time, I want to talk specifically about the why are the sacrifices happening, and because they're paused, an end of sacrifice. So they are happening. Why are they happening? What reinstitutes them? And then why will there be sacrifices during the millennium when Jesus is here? He is the sacrifice that takes away the sins of the world, the ultimate sacrifice. Why do we need more sacrifices during the time of the millennial temple? So we will talk about that. We will talk about the Battle of Armageddon, and get into the millennium. Questions? That math is actually another language? No. I think math is a tool, just like many other things are tools. I suppose, depending upon who you talk to, math can be utilized as a language, but I don't necessarily think that math is a language as we think of a language, where that we converse in math. I had somebody else. Oh, I know what it was. I took Max and Austin a couple of days ago down to visit Grace College. And on the way down there, we were talking about some of these things, and the whole idea of numerology came up. And we talked about what numerology is, and I tried to bring back examples from my day and totally dated myself. It was awful. I talked about the Da Vinci Code, that movie, and of course they, what? Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm so old. And so we talked through some of that stuff, how that people believe that certain numbers represent certain characters and that kind of a thing. And there are individuals that are out there that are just kind of over the top with that type of stuff. And they believe that computers have a lot to do with that, of course, because computers read numbers, don't they? Okay, what is it? Zeros and ones. Okay, ones and zeros, and I don't understand it, but that's what they do. They read zeros and ones, um, and so there's all of that stuff. And then we talked a little bit about Nostradamus, and of course they didn't know who in the world Nostradamus was either. I'm thinking to myself, what are these kids learning in school? Um, but yeah, it was a good conversation, and we have to be careful about a lot of that stuff because that borders on the occult, and we talked about that, and yeah, it was a good conversation. So, but no, I don't necessarily think it's a language per se. I think it can be utilized that way by means of maybe codes, secret codes and stuff, like ciphers. A lot of places used ciphers back in the day. Um, Anything else? Okay. Hope it's clear as mud. See you next time.